Hello, and welcome to the Schmidt List, the podcast for people dedicated to managing successful projects, developing impactful products, and building engaged teams. And now, here's your host, Kurt Schmidt.
Hello, everyone. This week, I'm talking with Adam Edgerton, production director at Copious, a digital agency located in Portland, Oregon. Building a winning team is difficult enough, but deciding on which business model to follow for your agency is an incredible challenge. I hope you enjoy listening as Adam and I crack open those topics and chug them down with vigor. Adam, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Of course.
Currently, you're a production director is your title.
That's correct, yep.
And nobody wants to grow up to be a project manager or production director. How did you find yourself in these roles?
Sure. Yeah, I can very much relate. I didn't even know it was a thing by title.
Right.
I kind of grew up building desktop computers, messing around with early HTML websites. Definitely a technologist, I suppose. Went to school, started out in computer engineering. Quickly decided that wasn't quite the right thing. I went a little bit more of a people-oriented role. But so I ended up with a business degree with a marketing focus, joined a tech company on the marketing team, and it was unfortunately almost a hostile relationship between the developers and the marketing team. And I found myself as the person who could kind of speak both languages.
Sure.
So suddenly I'm doing this project management thing, and at some point somebody labeled that for me. And I guess I am a project manager. Looked it up, realized, wow, there's certifications for this. There's a lot of material out there. And that's kind of when I transitioned into the agency world, which is where I've been now for 7-8 years.
Great.
So 3 different agencies along the way. I started just kind of as a project and account manager role, grew with the company for a while, ended up leading and managing that team. And then I've had a couple of transitions since then, but all in a very similar type of environment. So these days, yeah, production director, that's production or producer, we generally consider to be the dual hat project manager, account manager. We don't divide the roles because we're a fairly small organization at Copious.
You mentioned you dived deeper into project management and started seeing all the different certifications and all the different frameworks and all those different ways you could approach it. You know, how did you end up deciding on which one was the best for you, or which approach would work the best? Was it trial and error, or were you pretty committed from the get-go to a certain sort of approach?
Yeah, actually, so that first job before I joined an agency it was client side, and I ended up kind of doing product management, again, without really realizing that was a thing. It was more hey, we have this new product we want to get to market. And my operations-minded brain could put together the picture of where are we today, where could we be, and what do we need to do to get there? And so I think what expedited that whole process of kind of framing my self-identity as a project manager was that company got acquired and it seemed like a good time to move on. So joined an agency, and the agency was small, and so really it was, well, I'm not a developer, I'm not a designer. They have these project manager roles, and that seems to be an interesting fit of the people side of things, but it certainly helps if you know the technology and the design. And so it's definitely felt like kind of falling backwards into the role and finding that, oh, it's a good fit.
I've talked to lots of project managers, and every single one of them has a very similar story to what you're talking about, is that they found themselves kind of bridging the gap between 2 different groups more and more, and then eventually learned that there was a role and there's frameworks and there's all these other crazy things that we could apply to this to make it a thing and a value for the organization, for the team.
Yeah. And I think the processes that we'd apply to our projects were very Agile in nature before I really knew Agile to the degree that I do today. Mm-hmm. It's good and bad, the Agile Manifesto. Unfortunately, they made their manifesto so broad that it's hard to come up with a reasonable process that wouldn't fall within Agile. So those guys just kind of, I think, forever claimed all future Agile-ish processes. Mm-hmm. And it just happens to be that Scrum has been the one that's become the most prevalent in the software industry.
I get put in those positions to help coach people around different frameworks, and people love to bring up Agile. You know, true Agile is a manifesto. It's a way to approach solving a problem. Mm-hmm. It's a culture first manifesto, not a process first manifesto.
Absolutely.
So would you say that's really helped steer some of the ways that you've worked in these different roles?
It definitely has. Yeah, if anything, I'm just personally a little bummed that they made it so broad and flexible to be inclusive of the right way to do software development that I can't come up with my own manifesto and have it be significantly different.
Working in software is a contact sport. It can be ugly. You can be bumped around and bruised the more you're involved and the bigger the project. Is there a time maybe where you were working on a project that maybe didn't go so well? And what were some of the lessons learned from that project not going so well?
Never. They've all been perfect.
And this is why I'm talking to you, Adam, because you're going to let everybody know which pitfalls to avoid. You know the map of all the potholes, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, I've certainly made some mistakes on projects that I've learned from personally, but it seems like at a high level, so much of what you get wrong is how you set it up at the beginning. So I've found myself, even if my role has never been sales or biz dev, the further upstream I can insert myself in that process, the better the outcome on the project. There's a lot of risk that you can reduce up front with a lot of education, and it can be really time intensive and it gets expensive. And so I suppose that's where, paid discovery around a project with a potential client can be really useful. If you're kind of handed off something that's been baked and there's a statement of work for it and there's very little input from the person who gets to manage the risks, that's a recipe for disaster.
Mm-hmm. And so give me an example of some of those techniques you use at the beginning of projects that have been successful for you.
I wouldn't say it's necessarily techniques as much as knowing the right questions to ask. Or the right expectations to set. A few of the big ones there would be just time involvement from whoever the client stakeholder or the project stakeholders might be. It's not that you can throw it over the wall with a few loosely defined requirements and expect that you're going to get back something that you're happy with.
Mm-hmm.
It's often educating them on how to be a good product owner for their product, on not just how to define the granular requirements, but how to be an advocate within their own organization and sell their own solutions and their own strategies to their boss and their boss's boss. The more you can do that successfully, the more you're going to set yourself up to deliver something that actually creates value, that results in more of a partnership versus a one-off project.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the first project, engaging with a new client, it's always going to be a little bit tricky because they're not going to want to just throw money at you. They're going to want some sort of a clear deliverable, often for a fixed bid or more constraints around it. Once you've proved yourself through one project, there's a lot more flexibility with how you approach the second and the third and the fourth.
Yeah, I agree. And going back to what you said about teaching clients how to be product owners, there's a number of ways to do that. I used to have a deck that I would walk through clients with on what it meant to be a product owner. I mean, we put together a pretty sizable presentation on what that meant because just like you said, a lot of people thought it was kind of like mowing the lawn. I could just hand this over, you'll take care of it. When I get home, it's all done. But that's not the case when it comes to software, as I'm sure you've experienced over and over again.
Yeah, that'll work all right if you are willing to get back something. If your requirements are, I need a thing, that might work all right for you.
Yeah, it's funny that the requirements never really are just, I need a thing.
Right.
When it goes back to the Agile approach versus Waterfall, what have you found has been the real value? As you mentioned, you've done some Waterfall in the past and are focused more on Agile these days. What have you found has been the one key difference for you making that switch in that approach?
I think it's the flexibility in the mindset. And I think when you bring that to a client, it's going to allow for a conversation around scope, timeline, and your budget, and the need for at least one of those three to be flexible. And sometimes that's not the case and you can't. Ultimately, I'd say I haven't seen at an agency I've worked with or other agencies where I have peers, I've never seen an agency doing pure Agile. I've seen very close to it, but there's still waterfall elements. Even if your stakeholders are totally bought in around how Agile works and 2-week sprints and demoing regularly, all of which are great, their boss or their boss's boss still often has some high level outcome, even if it's a list of 5 items that the website or the application needs to hit
by a certain time,
by a certain date with a certain rough dollar range attached to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I've seen some organizations where they're trying to implement Agile all the way up, but those are few and far between. And more often than not, agencies are working with large enterprise clients where they're working with the agency because they need a more flexible business model than the way they're structured.
I've seen a lot of marketing teams trying to move towards Agile, and in the current Copious, you're doing some marketing there as well as software builds. Am I correct?
Yeah, I would say by and large, it's more design strategy and builds around commerce, particularly. Right. And so there's definitely the commerce strategy and how that plays out in marketing aspect of things.
Sure. And how have you found success in the kind of Agile framework, incorporating content strategy into that?
We don't do content strategy internally, but it's a focus that we either need a contractor or we need the client to handle it. Mm-hmm. And especially in the case where our client's going to handle it, it's bringing that along early, setting expectations again, helping them build a framework for their own content strategy if it doesn't exist. And so in Agile, it's really just getting ahead of that early in the sprints before it's suddenly you're in QA and the content isn't ready.
And are you mixing design and development all together in your sprints, or are you more give the design a head start and let the development team come in with the brooms and sweep up after? Is that more your approach, or do you have more of an integrated approach?
It depends on the project. We're certainly most Agile in the development phase. That's where even on our clients where the client wants to be more of a traditional waterfall approach, internally we're still running sprints. We're trying to demo for ourselves and have workable product on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's important. I find a lot of teams where maybe the client isn't as engaged as you would prefer, but doing those internal demos can make up for a lot, especially when you have somebody like yourself that's a translator for the client. You understand what the ultimate goals are. You're really focused on those. You can be a representative for the client during those demos. Yep. And I think that's an important role I think it gets overlooked sometimes, the importance of that, because with the work that we do at Foundry, we really work on building long-term roadmaps with clients to show them the milestones of how this is going to impact their business over time. And I've found that to be a really successful tool for communicating that this is not a one and done project. This is a longer term, hopefully new revenue stream for your business, or at least new engagement stream.
Right. Yeah. Between that and being able to do total cost of ownership analysis, really speaking the financial language and the future planning language of the larger organization you're partnering with is pretty key to landing that ongoing business, I would say.
Yeah,
or at least sinking your teeth further into the organization that you're seen more as a partner and less as a vendor.
No, I'm really glad you brought up that total cost of ownership. I found that to be a key differentiator for certain companies that really focus on that kind of communication with a client. Being able to sit down and figure out, because again, estimates are hard, but we need to have an understanding of what level of investment is going to be needed over the entire life cycle of this piece of software. Yep. What are some ways that you approach that total cost of ownership, that conversation, maybe that exercise? What are some ways that you have found success?
Yeah, I think if you know your platform well, or if you work with several primary platforms, each of them over time, you get a sense for what's the general major upgrade cycle versus minor upgrades. What's the rough average project cost to make a major replatform happen or a major upgrade cycle happen? Take the 3 to 5 year average to redesign period, I'd say is what most marketing and commerce teams prefer, or things start to feel a little bit dated at that point. Luckily, that aligns pretty well with that same upgrade cycle for most software. So I've really never talked more than a 3 to 5 year total cost of ownership with a client. And at that point, it's really just what's that major phase one project? And then specifically with commerce, it's been fun because often you're working with commerce directors versus marketing directors. And in that case, they tend to be just a little bit more data driven. They tend to care about ROI, and they can measure very clearly against conversions on the site the difference you're making. And so there's often more ongoing budget that's desired to be spent there. So just helping them make the case for what their growth goals look like. Do they want to make their online sales channels a larger percentage of revenue? Are they growing overall and want their online sales to keep pace? And if at that point, you can kind of take a certain percentage of their overall expected revenue and use that as another good benchmark for how much